Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the webinar. Just as a reminder, this webinar will be in English, and tonight we will talk about positive leadership. My name is Gabriele Filieri, and I am a volunteer of the PMI Northern Italy chapter. With me, there is also Sandro Battisti, who helped out to arrange the event. We are part of the D Team International, which is the team supporting professional development through the organization of international webinars in English. I would like to welcome Ulka Srikande. She's a terrific speaker from the US. In particular, she comes from Minnesota. But let me give you some information before starting with the webinar. Attending this webinar gives you the opportunity to have one PDU for all PMI certifications. The PDU is split in two parts, 0.5 for leadership and 0.5 for strategic and business management. If you have questions, I kindly ask you to write them down in the questions section. You can send them in any time during the webinar. If you want, you can ask the question in Italian and we will translate in English for you. We are going to have a Q&A session only at the end of the presentation. So Ulka is not going to answer to your question right away, but only at the end of the presentation. In case we won't have enough time to answer to all your questions, we are going to ask Ulka to provide the answers offline, and we'll post them to the PMI Northern Italy chapter LinkedIn page in the coming days. You all will receive an email tomorrow to complete the survey to express your opinion about the webinar. It will take only 5 minutes to do it. There are only 10 questions. The last question will give you the opportunity to provide free comments and suggest a topic for the next webinar. Okay, now I'm going to introduce briefly the webinar topic. Tonight, Ulka is going to talk about positive leadership, as I mentioned before. Bringing the power of success back to the teams is critical to an organization's success. Currently, most organizations and teams need to be filled by a coach approach to implement strong project management principles. And just a few words about Ulka. She's a strengths-based leadership coach. Ulka brings over a decade of combined experience in conducting national and regional leadership workshops, as well as leading complex projects and programs in the nonprofit, academic, startup, and large corporate sectors. Having led very diverse teams throughout her career, she's bringing people and projects together with productive outcomes for both. Her mission is to empower leaders and managers with tools and coaching insights that allow them to use the best in them to bring about the best in their teams. Now, Ulka, I'll hand it over to you for your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Gabriele. This is great. I am really excited to be a part of this group. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the webinar. This webinar is meant to be a lively and an interactive session. So, if at all possible, whenever we talk about questions or if there are any interactions during the webinar, please use the chat to respond, and we can talk through those elements as we go. Like Gabriele said, we will be taking questions at the end, but the interactions can go on throughout the session. So as Gabriele mentioned, we will be talking about positive leadership. And the first question really becomes why? Why do we need this positive leadership approach or a coach approach? It is very well established that both the strategic planning in the workplace as well as the culture in the workplace establishes productivity. We spend more than half of our waking hours at the workplace. So it's not just business sense, but it also makes personal and professional sense to have positivity in the workplace so that we can drive productivity in that manner. So today we will be talking about two elements that constitute a productive workplace. One is the strategic planning and the processes. We need to have proper processes in place, proper infrastructure in place, and a good strategy or a vision for the workplace in order for us to be productive. And the second side is the culture that we develop. We talk about leadership culture, but essentially it's you and I who make up that culture. It's not just about leaders who we may or may not interact on a daily basis. It's about us, it's about our teams. And the question really is, how do we make our days and our team's days productive in a positive way without having to use authoritative measures? We have to do that every once in a while, but how can we create that collaborative and positive space in order for us to find that success that our team needs? So today we will be experimenting with multiple enablers of this team empowerment. Before we start that, I really like to again revisit why we need positive leadership. It's basically because we want to reduce performance busters, which basically means on a given day, if you're at work, you may be extremely productive. Other days, you might find yourself dulling out a little bit. The factors could be multiple. The factors could be either your own internal chemistry, where you may or may not be feeling good, or it's the external environment. So as leaders or as team leads, it's important for us to manage our own internal environment and the external environment around us to create that positivity. So I've listed a couple areas here that are commonly that you would see commonly leading to a breakdown in work or reduced productivity or increased anxiety. And I'd like everyone to use the chat if possible. Let's see if it works, to see what your performance busters are. So for example, if a workplace or even our teams for that matter become overly competitive, competition is good, but if it's overdone, then that can reduce workplace productivity actually. If there are communication breakdowns, if there are too many conflicts, if there's burnout, then that's when we see reduction in performance. And many organizations are now creating an overhaul, at least here in the US. I'm not sure how it is in Italy. I hear that in Italy the workplaces have a positive environment to begin with, so that's always good to hear. But what are the couple factors that lead you to not want to get up in the morning and go to work? So let's just talk about that for a minute before we go into saying how we can enable positivity so that these things don't happen. So for all those who are comfortable and would like to, just type the words in the chat box as to what would reduce workplace productivity, like your own productivity or your own passion. What would, what circumstances would lead you to not perform at your best? I'll just give people a minute. I don't see anything in the chat.
So Ulka, this is Gabriele. You can go to the question section, and people is starting writing something. I don't know if you can see. Yeah.
Okay, team engagement and proactivity is what I see. Okay.
Some people mentioned also conflict. Let me see better.
Okay.
So some people mentioned conflict environment, not clear directions.
Impossible deadlines, okay.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, missing vision, command and control approach. Oh, now I can see them, okay. Okay, yeah, so these are very good points. So we want to make sure that as leaders ourselves, we keep this in mind, and our leadership approach should be a part of that solution, both for ourselves as well as for our teams around us. It just makes logical sense, right? To have an environment where we can work well and we can have people work well and the business thrives. The idea to have boring activity or repeat things that are boring, sure. So there are many organizations that are creating a very conscious effort for the culture to be conducive to workplaces so that productivity and performance can happen at their optimal level. These are just couple examples that I've used. These are a couple books that talk through those. However, if you look at the first book, which is Hit Refresh, this was written by Microsoft's CEO Satya Nadella, and he has a very profound approach to how he is trying to change the culture within Microsoft itself to make it more focused on empathy, self-discovery, self-awareness, active listening, and really building that trust and compassion in order for us to hit those business results. And it comes from a very touching story, which is a very personal story for him, as to how he discovered the significance of empathy through his personal life, some challenges that he faced in his personal life, and then he brought that to work, which really worked very well for him. There's another example from Indra Nui, if you have heard of her. She was rather the CEO of PepsiCo, which is a multi-billion-dollar entity, and she mentioned the significance of empathy and active listening, and just very small steps to recognize what's being done in the workplaces in order for us to have that positive environment. And it all begins really with trust, sensitivity, compassion, and honestly, it begins with ourselves. Before we coach it to others, it begins with ourselves. So we have to look within ourselves first before we can go out with the same approach. So when we talk about a coach approach to positive leadership, like Gabriele mentioned, there are two aspects to it. One is the strategic aspect and the tactical aspect, and then the other is the soft skills, like we call them. It's more on emotional intelligence, emotional quotient, people skills, social skills. So we'll talk through the strategic aspects for a little bit, and then I'll focus a little more on how we as team leads can be those internal coaches for our organizations and our PMO groups. Uh, so, just a quick assessment: how many of us work in how many of us work in in organizations that have mature PMOs? Do we have do we have people who, okay, awesome, I see a couple hands go up over there. So typically depending on the maturity of the PMO group, there are PMOs can be cross-functional in nature and work at a portfolio level, and that is important in order for a business to succeed, because then PMOs can be central repositories of the portfolio, and the portfolio can be managed through a central organization or part of the organization that will then take care of the resources as well as the project budget for that particular portfolio, and then funnel it into portfolio prioritization and resource mapping. So depending on the maturity of the organization or the needs of the organization, you would be a part of a portfolio level organization. Uh, Being there makes us automatically a center of excellence for continuous improvement. So from a strategic standpoint, having that visibility to what is going on in the business from a business standpoint, and also being the center of excellence and the ambassador for continuous improvement is critical in order for us to succeed as an organization. From a strategic standpoint, then we move on to the tactical or the operational aspect of being project managers or program managers, where we are more of internal coaches, especially if you're working with cross-functional teams. We have to be strong training partners within the organization for training and development. The training and development could be around standard work, it could be around basic project management practices that should not just be limited to the PMO or to the I see a question what a PMO is. It's the project management office, basically. So in some organizations, there will be a dedicated department that has project managers reporting into some function of the business. And so being those strong training partners for standard work, for daily management, for basic project management principles that should be followed across the organization, as well as being change ambassadors. So making sure that we are reviewing our own processes at least once or twice a year and really assessing its effectivity within the organization and within the projects. If there is something that we can simplify, we should all be about simplification. If there is any way we can simplify something, that's the first thing we should be looking into, because then that's going to increase our productivity. If we simplify our own tools and technologies and techniques, then that's what's going to help us. And we've got to be those change ambassadors. From there, we move into really being our own team leads, and how do we manage our group, our teams, our people. And again, we may or may not have direct reports. For direct reports, this can feed into development goals. But for PMs, most likely than not, you would be working with cross-functional teams that you don't have direct authority over. So really assessing how we can leverage the strength in a team of individuals and have complementary partnerships to make the team a complete team. So I'm not sure how many of you have heard of a very well-known author and speaker. He's Marcus Buckingham. He's originally from the UK, but I think he migrated over to the US a couple decades ago, and he is a pioneer in strengths-based leadership. And what he basically says is, no individual is perfect and well-rounded, but a team is, if you are able to leverage on the team's strengths, and that's when the team becomes strong. And we'll go into a little more details of how to develop those strengths-based teams a little into this presentation. And then lastly, being resonant leaders. We should be able to resonate with the group around us, with the talent around us, and that can happen only through self-awareness and social awareness. That's where EQ or the emotional intelligence comes into play. And a very important aspect of that also is intentional listening. Listening not just to a point where you're waiting for the other person to finish so you can start talking. It's not just that, but truly intentionally listening to what the person is saying, not just in terms of words, but in terms of tonality, in terms of body language, making sure that you're listening with your eyes and ears open, because that's where you can do a lot of root cause analysis and come up with solutions that otherwise would have been missed. So I've just drawn a small RACI matrix here for the PMO's role in business success. Again, not all of us may be part of organizations that have portfolio level PMOs, but if you look at the overall business, Basically, it starts with the vision and mission of the business that gets translated to a strategy, and that strategy needs to be prioritized to a portfolio, and then we have resources allocated to that portfolio, and then we should ideally be a part of this prioritization and resource allocation exercise at a business level, so that when we are executing, we can make trade-offs, and the trade-offs are so much more cleaner and clearer if we have visibility to that, and then that leads to business growth. So we have an important role to play in a business's success. So if you look at the RACI matrix, it's a very simple table that I've put together. Is everybody I'm assuming everybody's familiar with RACI. The R stands for responsible, A stands for accountable, C stands for consulting, and I stands for inform. So as PMs, we should definitely be informed of the vision and mission, though we may not have a direct say in making that vision and mission for the company. And then we should definitely be consulted at the business and the strategy level to ensure that the portfolio is a robust portfolio and we can support it. And then, of course, the portfolio funnel and prioritization should directly be in our realm of control. We should be accountable for it along with the business units. And then the program and project execution, of course, we are ultimately responsible for that. And so how do we as a PMO become a center for positive leadership? And the reason why I bring this up is because we have more power than we think, maybe not in terms of authority, but in terms of influence. And this is what I wanted to emphasize over here. So we have a very close interaction with the business units, and I know that this is not well spoken of, or it's not even mature at this point, but we can have a very good influence on the HR side of things, the human resources side of things, because we are at a confluence of cross-functional leadership. And if you look at the Venn diagram between the PMO and the business units, our role is to drive business alignment through portfolio prioritization and execute the projects that are aligned with that business portfolio and make trade-offs happen. So that's a very important role. The next aspect is co-owning internal processes between and that's where we can influence or we can be influenced by and partner with HR, so that we can become process trainers, we can co-own internal processes and really coaches to strengths-based development, because research has shown that strengths-based organizations or teams, actually, even within organizations, research has shown that even within organizations, teams that use a strengths-based approach are more productive and are more successful in terms of outcomes than teams within the same organization who, like somebody was mentioning, like command and control, negativity, repetition. All those things can be avoided if we use a strengths-based approach and allow people to be at their best performance levels. And then this is slightly out of our realm sometimes, but I think we do have influence on is talent development and skill set alignment, especially at our team levels. If we are able to identify any skill set gaps or any enhancements that need to happen, or if we can positively influence somebody else's development by influencing their function, I think we play an important role over there also. So this slide is just to emphasize the significance of our roles over and beyond just managing time, schedule, scope, and cost. It's much more than that. So when we talk about, now we'll move into the softer side of leadership development for us as project managers or program managers. Really the three elements of successful performance outcomes. One is the process optimization that we talked about up above. And then we have strengths-based teams that we need to leverage. And then the last thing is, it's last, but it's very important, that we we work on our own self-awareness and self-care, because if we are to the team what we are within ourselves. And so it's really critical that we have a solid foundation for ourselves, for self-improvement, self-awareness, and self-care, and then that will reflect in our team leadership. So speaking about developing a strengths-based team, I'm just going to go ahead with a very technical definition of a strength, though we all know it. Just wanted to baseline ourselves. A strength, as Marcus Buckingham puts it, is an activity that makes you feel strong. And a weakness is an activity that makes you feel weak. But the difference is that there may be some activities that you may be really good at, but if it drains you, it's not your strength. And I can give you a very classic example of children. Kids may be really good at certain areas in certain subjects at school or colleges, but that doesn't necessarily make it their strength. That doesn't necessarily make it their passion. If it's draining them out, then that probably is not their strength. It's the same for us. There are certain things at work that we are really good at, but if it's draining us, then it may not necessarily be our strength. So that's something to be aware of. I'm going to pause here for a minute and give everyone a chance to again type in the chat to say, give yourself 3 words that will describe what excites you about your work, that you want to come to work every day. You want to get out of bed and come to work. What are those 3 things? Two or three things that that make you want to come back to work, that you're good at, that you feel energized by. So I'm going to give people a couple minutes to just write that down. What is it that you love about your work or yourself at work that keeps you coming to work every day? Service, project. Okay, the project itself, that's nice. Responsibility, okay. Be aware I'm part of the project, okay. Service, all right. Good relationship with the team, sure. Teamwork, becoming a co-owner of the process, nice. The value I give, sure. Like we said, in the beginning, we spend most of our, like more than half of our working hours at work, so we have to see value, sure. Making things useful, meet smart people, sure. Responsibility, awareness, collaboration, challenge, entrepreneurship, working with colleagues. All right. So essentially what we're saying is that when we are empowered to take responsibilities, to work with the team, to create a positive environment, to create value, that's when we want to come to work. And how do we make that happen? To add value, to be responsible, to work with teams. Essentially, whatever we are good at, if we do more of that, that's what then drives us to do more and more. And that also energizes us to learn, to have a growth mindset, to learn more of what we may not be the best at. And so here is a very simple anatomy of a strength, right? A strength starts with a natural talent, a talent that we have. It's awareness and appreciation of your talent. What are your talents? What are you good at? What are you strong at? But just having that talent doesn't necessarily make it a strength. You have to invest time and practice using that talent and make it into a strength. So a strength is a consistent, near perfect performance on a routine basis. So if somebody had to ask one of your colleagues or one of your team members and say, okay, what are you, what are the salient features of this particular leader? You will come up with a string of words. You will hear a string of words that repeat across people. People will use similar words, and that's kind of where your consistent performance is, and that's where your strength lies. So we should be able to do that for ourselves and for our team members. When we are talking about strengths, we should always note that no strength or no talent or no theme is a positive or a negative. These are neutral. We have what we have as talents. They're not meant to be labels. They're meant to enhance performance. And so leading with a positive intent is critical in a strengths-based approach, because if one person has a strength that the other person does not, that doesn't give us the leverage to compare and use it against somebody. It's leading with a positive intent. Differences can and should be used as an advantage, because there will be differences, and we have to remember that people need one another. Even though we're independent in terms of leadership, in terms of performance, we still need each other. Collaborative space is critical in order for anyone to succeed. In fact, there has been a study that showed differences in levels of performance based on certain ways leaders behaved, and it showed that, of course, positive attention or positive reinforcement encouraged more performance, or showed more productivity. The thing that hurt performance and productivity the most was any leader or any manager ignoring their team members or their direct reports. Being ignored was considered the most destructive and disruptive to workplace productivity. So how do we start leading with a strengths-based approach? How do we help people or our teams or even ourselves identify what our strengths are? One simple thing could be to take the Strengths Finder. It's a book that I can send a reference to. It's a book where they have, I think, 34 different themes or strengths that a person can have, and then you take a 40 to 45 minute survey, and it will give you your top 5 strengths, and then ways to apply it in the workplace. The other way to do it is you name it, claim it, and aim it. So essentially, what you could do as a team exercise, and I've done this in the past and it has worked pretty well, is you just review a couple job descriptions and then highlight the words that resonate most with you. Or you take a diary, and for a week you just make a note of what activities you're doing and which one of them really energize you and which one of them drain you. Just keep a diary of for 7-8 days, and you will figure out what your themes are, or what you really enjoy doing and what you're good at. Then the next thing to do as a team, if the team is comfortable, is to make the highlighted words and phrases visible to yourself, obviously, and then you can share it with trusted people, and just reinforce it for yourself. And then pick one of those 2 or 3 things, and then ask yourself, how can I use this theme today to enhance my own performance and to enhance somebody else's work? Just do that for 2 to 3 weeks, and you can see how you can build off of your strengths. That's the easiest way to do it. There was one time when I had done a workshop for a bigger team. I think it was about 20 people, 25 people. And we had everybody do their exercise, do an exercise on what they are good at and what really drains them out. And then what we had done is we had them build complementary partnerships. So for example, there was one woman who was very good at organizing tasks and at prioritizing. And I'm giving you a very simple example. And there was another person who struggled with the same exercise. And so we had them form complementary partnerships, and then that person almost became like I would say like a peer coach, a peer mentor, and a peer accountability partner that they worked off of. And then that woman helped this guy begin organizing the work and prioritizing the work in a way that became more meaningful for that person. So it's basically forming these complementary partnerships. working on a skill building rally. If the team thinks this is one particular strength we all need to build, then we just go on a skill building rally and see, either call in a trainer or be each other's accountability partners and measure how we are progressing across couple weeks. And the last thing is, if it is technical, sometimes the skill sets are very technical in nature. So at that time, you would want to either use technology or invest in training and development goals so that we can get what we need to in terms of skill sets to perform at our best. So that's about processes and about how we can have a mindset that leads to positive leadership. The next very critical aspect, I think this is more important than how we lead, is just self-awareness and social awareness, because this to me is the crux of how we deliver to the positive leadership or to the coach approach. And this starts with self and social awareness. And I just wanted to bring this one. There are many aspects to self-awareness and social awareness. I just wanted to focus on one today because it just makes it's easy to understand and it just makes so much sense. This is drawn from a book called I'm Okay, You're Okay. This book is a very, very old book. It was probably written in the 50s, early 50s, I think. So maybe we weren't even born at that time. But it really talks about four life stages, if you could call it that, or four frames of mind. It's called I'm Okay. Yeah, I'm going to go from the top left. I am not okay, you're okay. I am not okay, you are not okay. I am okay, you are not okay, and I am okay and you're okay. So these are different types of transactions that it's called transactional analysis. So this basically stems from how we view ourselves and how we view others. And from a this was written by so Thomas Harris was a psychiatrist, psychologist, and so it was written from that standpoint. And there are many aspects that I won't delve into right now that lead to this thought process as we are growing up. Our social circumstances around us, all of that lead to us having a predominant lifestyle, life frame, to call it that. And of course, the happiest place or the healthiest place to be is I'm okay and you're okay. This is not common. This is something that we have to develop. Most of us will fall in the rest of the three categories by default. It's only through self-awareness and constant social awareness that you can bring yourself to this I'm okay, you're okay position. And only when you're in this position that you, not, by you I mean anyone, can perform at their best and have people around them perform at their best also. So there is nothing right or wrong about the other three. Those are what we're conditioned to. But what we need to be aware of is, okay, this is where I am at right now. So some person maybe at a where is that I am not okay and you are not okay position, and these positions come from different experiences of life or temporary situations, even at work. So if the workplaces sometimes if they're toxic, if they are too political, or if there are too many changes happening, or if we are new to certain circumstances, or if we are doing something new for the first time, then we may be temporarily putting ourselves in this position. But the important thing is to be aware of where we are at in this grid, and then moving ourselves very consciously to this I'm okay, you're okay position. That's where leadership happens at its best. So I'm going to use that same grid and just turn it around a little bit. in terms of what it means for team performance and self-awareness. So if you look at the I'm okay, you're okay, clearly at that time, the team performance, people engagement, self-awareness is going to be at its highest. And that's where we want ourselves to be. The next one is I'm okay and you're not okay. We are trained to be authoritative as we move more and more into our into leadership roles. And this is okay if you're doing it consciously, not out of compulsion. If you're aware of why you're doing what you're doing, because sometimes we do need to be authoritative, because otherwise how decisions will not get made. But that doesn't have to be like it doesn't always have to be I'm okay and you're not okay. We've got to try to push it back to I'm okay, you're okay, but just being aware of that. I'm not okay and you're okay can happen again if we are new leaders, if there's something new we're doing for the first time, if there are changes. There can be many circumstances that we may be put into situations like this. But again, being aware of that and then trying to ramp up your own performance and self-awareness is important. And this place, I'm not okay and you're not okay, in terms of self-awareness and people engagement, team performance, it's really not the best place to be. So again, there may be circumstances where we're pushed into being in that frame, but it's really important to identify that and then bring yourself back to the I'm okay, you're okay position. The critical thing is self-awareness and how you want to bring yourself out of that situation, because that can create a toxic environment and we wouldn't want to be there. So in a nutshell, I'm going to say that people may not remember exactly what you did or what you said, but they will always remember how you made them feel. And guess what? How we feel is how we perform. So how you make your team feel is going to be how they're going to perform, or how we are going to perform. And so that's where positive leadership becomes most critical in order for everyone to succeed. So I'm going to end with saying that we have to be our own coaches and internal coaches for the organization. Creating strengths-based partnerships is something that we should aspire to do in order for us to improve the productivity and the performance of the teams. And the simplest way to do it is discover the best in yourself and then use that to bring out the best in your team. And this team can be at home or at work, it doesn't matter. But that's how we make a positive impact to our own lives and to lives around us. So we have 15 minutes, so I'm going to pause here, and I'm going to say grazie for the opportunity. I'm not sure if I said it right, but it was my second attempt probably in doing that, and would be happy to take questions at this point.
Okay, thank you, Ulka. Very, very nice say. Grazie to you. And I took note of a couple of questions. Maybe we can start from the first one. In the meantime, people can keep asking themselves some questions, and they can post them in the same section where they interacted with Ulka. So I really ask you to do that. So if you have other questions, please ask them, and we will take note of them, and then we will answer them offline. So if you have questions, please go ahead. So the first question is from Pablo. He's asking, how is it possible to assess people talent? Any trick?
Okay. So yeah, so I would say if talents would fall into two categories. One is technical talents and one is the soft skills that we spoke about. From a soft skill standpoint, like I said, the best approach is a team approach, where you can go about it two ways. One is to actually take the Strengths Finder, which is a book, and I will send the reference to Gabriel, and he can forward it to all of you. It's a book that talks about different strengths. I think it falls under 34 different themes, and if you take that, if you follow that questionnaire, it will actually give you your top 5 strengths. So that's one approach. The second approach is to really ask, like we spoke about, we just ask people to make a note of things that they do on a daily basis, and what energizes them and what drains them. What energizes them would be typically would be their strengths, and what drains them would probably be their weakness. So just doing a diary, like taking a diary and making a note of what all things you do throughout the day, which of those things energize you and which of those things drain you. Just do it for a week or 2 weeks, and that should give you what your talent is.
Okay, very clear. The other question is always from Pablo, and then we have another one coming, popped out. So Pablo is asking maybe something you were mentioning before about PMO workplace. He actually had a question on what's the definition of mature PMO workplace. I don't know if you have a definition of in your experience what is a mature PMO workplace.
Sure. So I guess I can give you I can give you my research and my definition for sure. PMI also has a repository of PMO maturity. It has an entire book that talks about organizational maturity through a PMO's eyes. So that's a very good reference. There are different levels of maturities in a PMO based on the need of the organization and the tools and techniques employed. A mature PMO is a PMO that has in its place a good integration of business deliverables that are tied to project deliverables. So a PMO that has visibility to the business portfolio and has the authority or the empowerment to prioritize that portfolio, to prioritize resources cross-functionally, and then actually execute using standard work and simplified work processes. That's, in my mind, a mature PMO, where there is a clear line, there is a clear relationship between the business strategy, the business portfolio, and project execution. That's where a mature PMO is, along with having a very strong coaching culture where the PMs themselves are examples of how to lead with a positive mindset and a coach approach. All these things put together would make a mature PMO.
Okay, thank you. The next question is from Stefano. He's asking how to manage a conflict with a positive approach.
Sure, this is this could be a trick question. So I wouldn't say the most straightforward way. It may not be simple, but the most straightforward way is to really dive down to the root cause of the conflict. Quite a few times, the symptoms that we see in a conflict arise from certain causes that are hidden, that are unknown. And so really digging without reacting to the symptoms. So conflicts can, so the way the conflict is seen is sometimes through anger, disappointment, frustration, or a mix of many things. So those to me are symptoms of the conflict. The important thing is to avoid reacting to those symptoms and be able to drive to the root cause. Now, how to drive to the root cause can depend on the situation. It could either be through talking to the person himself or herself, or escalating it and making sure that the functional management is involved. it just depends on the situation, but addressing the root cause is critical to managing conflict in a positive way, because that's when you're demonstrating in action to people that you're not there as a command and control authority. You're actually there to solve problems. And sometimes there may be a situation where the root cause does lie with the person's own uh, own perception of things, and so that's something that needs to be resolved either with functional management or with a coach approach, like I said. But driving to the root, demonstrating that you want to drive to the root cause and that you understand that there is something underneath that has been unresolved, gives the power even back to the person who is a part of the conflict to become a part of the solution.
Okay, thank you again. So we have another question from Sarah. She's asking, can you give us some advice to deal with complaining people?
Yeah, so yeah, that's a good one. Well, again, it goes back to I think being resonant leaders, like self-awareness and social awareness, understanding what the root cause is. And I can tell you this much, even with experience, that if we want to, so that there are multiple ways, right? So you can either be direct and say and make it very clear, and especially complaining people, if it's disrupting the team, a stronger stand needs to be taken, especially if it's happening in front of the team. Then there has to be a very direct message saying that this approach is not going to work, making sure that it doesn't propagate to the rest of the team. Because sometimes what happens is if we encourage complaining from one person, then it just propagates throughout the group, thinking that it's acceptable. So that's clearly not acceptable behavior. So that ground rule needs to be laid out very straight and clear. However, if it's a chronic issue, then in addition to doing that, it's important again to go to root cause. And I can tell you this much from my own personal experience and from leaders who I have seen deal with these situations successfully. It takes a lot of self-awareness and perseverance, along with authority, to actually deal with the to go to the root cause of that issue. Not every root cause can be addressed, and so sometimes if it becomes very disruptive, I have had instances where the team members have had to be replaced or removed from the group. That has been a rare occurrence, but more likely than not, if a person is complaining, there is some cause behind it. I'll give you a quick example. Actually, there was one time when I was working with this was many years ago, when I was working with a group, and there was one person who would more likely than not deliver on time, would complain about the work given, and there was a lot of turmoil, and the other team members were being impacted. And so I set the ground rule and I spoke to the functional manager saying that this is happening, but I really wanted to understand why that was. And then one time we were having our one-on-one, and I just happened to ask him what was troubling him, what keeps him. I asked him the same question that I spoke about over here. What makes you get out of bed and come to work excited, and what makes you want to stay in bed and never get out of bed to come to work? And what I noticed is when he was speaking about those circumstances and situations, he himself was a troubled employee. He felt like his hard work was not being recognized. He was not feeling valued. And he gave examples of how he had at one point worked hard. And now he said he just doesn't want to because he doesn't feel cared for and valued. And that feedback to me was very important. And after that, our interactions improved, his complaining improved. Could I solve the entire root cause? Probably not, but at least I went back to the functional manager to lay that out, and then we had some way of resolving that issue, if not totally, at least partially. So that's one example. Not every root cause can be addressed, but really trying to understand that, again, complaining is a symptom of some cause, so going to that cause.
Okay. Thank you very much. Very clear. And there is another question from myself, actually, if I may. So let's suppose we are in the same team, and I'm in the not okay situation, and you are not you as well are not okay. So the same situation, the very bad one. So
Okay.
how to get out from there? I mean, is the only solution changing team for both, or there is a way together to get out from there?
Yeah. So, Gabriel, I think that's a nice question. It depends on the circumstance. Sometimes it depends on why we are in that I'm not okay or not okay situation. If it is a performance issue that cannot be resolved, then yes, probably the way to go is to split ways. The important thing is to at least trying to have that conversation, and for yourself thinking about, okay, this is where I feel I'm not okay, and this is where that person feels I'm not okay. So either having a conversation with a third person in place to try to resolve the root cause again, or to say, you know what, this circumstance may be leading for us to be in this I'm okay or you're I'm not okay, you're not okay situation. But at the same time, if we remove the situation, this will go away. Then try to take care of that situation. Otherwise, what has happened sometimes, I've seen a team where this has happened actually, where they were in an in that frame, and they realized that there was a big skill set mismatch. And so what happened, not to demean anybody's performance, but we said this is just the wrong place, and we split that group, and we had those two individuals go into two different groups which required a different skill set, and that resolved the issue. At other times, I have had conversations and had improvement in performance and self-awareness and understanding that then led to not needing to do that. But
Okay.
I can touch it. It's a very sensitive issue, Gabriel. If it's a true circumstance, we can talk offline.
Okay.
Because
Yes, for sure. I will call you back. And I don't know if we have a time for enough time for another question. Probably 2 minutes. Question coming from Hamed, asking, what are the strategies? What strategies do you suggest for developing self-awareness?
Sure, that's a great question. So there are many things, many things. The simplest thing that you can do is really, whenever you're having a conversation, just decide that, okay, in this conversation I'm going to apply this and see. Start with the easiest conversation I would recommend. But when you're having a conversation, while you're talking, be aware of the sensations that are going on in your body and your mind. How are you reacting? How are you feeling about what you're saying? That is the first step, so that you're noticing your own emotions and your own reactions to what you are saying or what the other person is saying. No judging here. You're not telling yourself whether you're right or wrong. You're just observing, and do that consistently for a period of a week or 2 weeks, and you will start noticing that you're not just observing a conversation, then you're also beginning to notice other people's reactions, and having that social awareness go up a little bit. The other techniques are, there are some mindfulness techniques that are very powerful, but that can be the next step. But the first step really is to just make a diary and a note of your own reactions in terms of sensations. Sometimes, you clutch your hands, you have a different facial expression, you just feel like you're sweating much more. There's so many things that are going on in our body as we go through these different emotions and conversations. That would be the first step.
Okay, Ulka. So I think we don't have time for additional questions. So let me take the advantage to remind people to take the survey tomorrow. So you all will receive an email. So it will take really 5 minutes of your time to go through the survey. Let me thank Ulka for this great, wonderful presentation and all your insights for us. And thank you all for attending this webinar tonight. And I'm going to see you again to the next English webinar. So
thanks
thank you.
everyone, and I'm happy to answer questions offline on LinkedIn.
Yeah, so you guys can see the contacts details in the last slide. Take notes of the email or send us an email and we will answer to your questions.
Yeah.
Thank you very much again, and have a good night, everybody.
Yeah. Feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. Yeah. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.